First of all, we will invite the chairman, Mr. Ardi, to say a few words. Friends of the media, good afternoon. The briefing today is to report to you the work of the House Committee in this session. First of all, I would like to invite the Deputy Chairman, Mr. Dennis Kwok, to report to you our consideration of bills, subsidy legislation, and policy matters. Thank you.
Okay.
In the current session, the House Committee held a total of 29 meetings. In terms of bills, based on the legislative program submitted to LegCo by the administration planned to introduce 22 bills into LegCo this session and eventually introduce 18. Together with 5 bills not on the legislative program, the administration submitted a total of introduced into LegCo a total of 23 bills in the current legislative session. Moreover, at the council meeting on the 11th of April, Mr. Frankie Yik introduced the Sailors' Homes and Missions to Seamen Incorporation Amendment Bill 2018. In terms of bills committees, the House Committee formed a total of 18 bills committee in the current session to scrutinize 18 government bills, including the Co-location Bill, the Human Organ Transplant Amendment Bill 2018, the Employment Amendment Bill 2018, and Financial Reporting Council Amendment Bill 2018. Despite the fact that members constantly urged the administration to introduce the bills in earnest so that members would have enough time to scrutinize the content and provisions of the bills of the legislative program submitted by the administrative this year, only 5 bills were submitted in the first half of the year, while 13 were submitted in the second half. Of the bills submitted in the second half of the year, 10 of them were only submitted at the end of April or later. 2 bills were only submitted at the final council meeting of the legislative session on the 11th of July. These 2 bills included Hotel and Guest House Accommodation Amendment Bill 2018 and Electoral Legislation Miscellaneous Amendment Bill 2018. The relevant scrutiny work can only begin in the next session. Moreover, 4 bills have not been introduced into LegCo, including the National Anthem Bill, Fire Safety Industrial Buildings Bill, Waste Disposal, Charging for Municipal Solid Waste Amendment Bill, and Discrimination Legislation Amendment Bill. In the current session, the members also scrutinized 153 items of subsidiary legislation, 1 technical memorandum, and 15 proposed resolutions presented by the administration. The HC formed 33 subcommittees to study 51 items of subsidiary legislation, 1 technical memorandum, and 7 proposed resolutions, including 3 items of subsidiary legislation on the commissioning of the westbound station of Guangzhou Shenzhen Hong Kong Express Rail Link, 2 proposed resolutions to raise the civil jurisdictional limits of the District Court and Small Claims Tribunal, Medical Council election and appointment of lay members regulation, and Securities and Futures Professional Investor Amendment Rules 2018. The House Committee also considered 5 items of subsidiary legislation made under the United Nations Sanctions Ordinance and not required to be tabled in Council, and they were referred to the subcommittee to examine the implementation in Hong Kong of resolution of the United Nations Security Council in relation to sanctions under the House Committee for consideration. In the current session, 3 subcommittees on policy issues formed under the HC completed their work and submitted reports to the House Committee, namely the Subcommittee on Children's Rights, Subcommittee to follow up issues related to the 3-runway system at the Hong Kong International Airport, Subcommittee on issues relating to bazaars. In addition, 4 SCs formed under the House Committee on policy issues were activated or have continued their work, including the subcommittee on issues relating to shopping centers, markets, and car parks in public rental housing estates and home ownership scheme estates, subcommittee to follow up issues related to the unified screening mechanism for non-refoulement claims, subcommittee on rights of ethnic minorities, and subcommittee on retirement protection. And one subcommittee on policy issues formed under the HC is to be activated, namely the subcommittee on issues relating to policy on industrial buildings. The media can refer to the sheet shared by the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as the Deputy Chairman informed you just now, in this session, the administration introduced 23 bills. The most controversial must be the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express Rail Link Co-location Bill. That is after the Chief Executive Council endorsed the customs, immigration and quarantine clearance arrangements at the West Kowloon station of the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express Rail Link. The House Committee held a special meeting immediately during the summer recess in August 2017 to be briefed by the Chief Secretary for Administrations, the Secretary for Transport and Housing, and the Secretary for Security on the details. And when the both committee submitted this report to the House Committee, also allows a relatively longer time for members to express their views. As for the coming session, it's expected that the workload of the Council will remain onerous in considering bills and legislative proposals. It's expected that the government will be tabling the National Anthems Bill, the National Anthem Bill, the Discrimination Legislation Miscellaneous Amendment Bills. These are issues of great concerns to the public. I'm sure members will consider them very carefully. And also, in this session, there have been particularly many requests for adjournment debate under Rule 16.4 of the Rules of Procedure. There are 8 in total compared to 2 in the last session. 2 of these proposals for adjournment debate were supported by the House Committee. One is a proposal by Mr. Gary Chen on the impact on the interests of Hong Kong and the country aside arising from the remarks made by Mr. Benny Tai, one of the initiatives of the Occupy Central Movement at a forum held in Taiwan in March 2018, that Hong Kong could consider becoming an independent state. And the other, a German debate, of course, is known to you too. That's the one moved by Mr. Roy Kwong on subsidence of viaduct piers of Yin Long section of MTR West Rail Line. On policy issues, as you know, there are now larger memberships at all 18 panels, so members have less time to speak. On issues of interest to the public, members were keen to set up subcommittees on policy issues. However, at any one time, we could only set up 10 subcommittees. You can only allow 10 subcommittees to be in action given the resources of the Council. Now there are 9 subcommittees on the waiting list. The House Committee is the platform for considering the activation of subcommittees on policy issues. The House Committee has been playing an active role to make arrangements as far as possible to give priority to subcommittees with urgent issues and that require a long operation time. Last Friday, the House Committee endorsed my proposal on the list of subcommittees to be given priority to be activated soon. This will allow this Council to start looking at various issues of public interest before the end of this term. Perhaps I could say this here. Now, there are so many subcommittees on policy issues proposed that shows that for members across the different parties, they would like to follow on various issues, but there are limited resources of this Council, so we couldn't take on too many subcommittees. So together with the Deputy Chairman, I will be striving for more resources from the government so we could set up more subcommittees on policy issues, because for issues of interest to members, this means there are issues of interest to the public. So we'd like to deal with them as soon as possible. At the press briefing last year, I already expressed my wish that members could have more exchanges and conduct more visits to the mainland at various provinces and cities. I'm glad that the panel on economic development, the panel on financial affairs, the panel on commerce and industry, and the panel on information technology and broadcasting were given the go-ahead by the House Committee to conduct a study duty visit to the Bay Area in April this year. I hope in future there will be more exchanges between panels and the mainland and more such visits, especially after the Bay Area Development Plan is announced. On international exchanges, the Parliament Liaison Committee of the House under the House Committee will be conducting a visit to the UK and Scotland for exchanges with the parliaments there. On procedures, usually the Council will refer matters to the Committee on Rules of Procedure for consideration before the matter is referred to the House Committee or the Council for a decision. On amendments of the Rules of Procedure in this session, the House Committee had a very detailed discussion when the relevant report of the Committee on Rules of Procedure and the amendments of individual members were submitted to the House Committee. And also, in this session, matter was referred to, the House Committee referred the matter to the crop for consideration, that is in relation to House Rule 10 on dealing with urgent questions proposed by members. And also we will be reviewing the arrangement of the Chief Executive attending our meetings later. On executive legislature relations, I'm sure this is something of interest to you as well as us. I have expressed the wish that the Chief Executive and his principal officials will enhance communications with members and different parties and groups. At the beginning of the session, the Chief Secretary for Administration indicated to me and the Chief Executive that the administration is committed to improving executive legislature relations. The administration is also committed to enhancing communications and interaction with members and the public. I'm glad to see that the executive legislature relations have indeed improved and business has gone on more smoothly. In this session, this council arranged 7 chief executives question time sessions, and members were able to ask questions of the chief executive in a short question, short answer format. This also shows that government is keen to improve relations with the legislature. On financial proposals, especially in relation to funding for works projects, I and the Deputy Chairman have maintained close liaison with the Chief Secretary. We're glad to see that after government has shuffled the order of business, the approval of funding for projects has gone on much better. We're happy to continue to serve as the bridge next year. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat and the Legal Service Division, as well as the members of the media, for your support of our work in the past year. Thank you. And I now welcome questions from the floor.
Starry, I have a question. This year, the number of government bills passed more than doubled compared with the year before. Would you say that it's because of the amendments to the rules of procedure or an improvement to the executive-legislature relationship in the past year? In terms of the amendments to the rules of procedure, what is the stance of the pro-establishment camp? The by-election is poised to take place on the 25th of November. I would first address the question before I invite Mr. Dennis Kwok to supplement. For the current session, as I said, the number of bills passed exceeded that of the previous year, and this is down to a number of reasons. In the first year of the current term administration, the government focused on livelihood and economic issues, and the bills introduced into LegCo were largely related to livelihood and economic issues, so it was relatively easier to achieve consensus. Of course, we saw controversial bills such as the co-location bill, but nonetheless, the co-location bill was also passed after filibustering was curbed. The Carrie Lam administration focused on economic development and livelihood in the first year, so most bills focus on these areas. I'm sure we all want to see more getting done, and hopefully more bills can be passed. And of course, this is also related to the amendments to the rules of procedure. The ROP were amended before last Christmas, and since the 1st of January this year, the council business has been relatively smooth. We saw less quorum calls, and less time was wasted due to quorum calls compared with the past. Overall speaking, after the amendments to the ROP, bills were able to be passed smoothly at the Legislative Council. Dennis, when you talk about the relationship between executive and legislature, the situation improved over the past year compared with the CY Leung era. But having said that, nothing can go worse than the CY Leung era. He was vicious, and he sought to prioritize some issues of controversy, and through LegCo, we have achieved more communication with its Chief Secretary for Administration. And for items that encountered challenges at the Public Works Subcommittee or Finance Committee, they were moved to the back of the queue to make way for other items or projects, which was a logical move. And we are happy that the administration has decided to do that for projects such as the music fountain. The Chief Secretary promised that they would follow up. In terms of the relationship between legislature and executive, more improvements are indeed possible. The Chief Executive has held more question and answer sessions at LegCo, but I feel that instead of staging a show, the Chief Executive should be spending time to take in views from members. The biggest difference between the current term administration and the CY Leung administration is that there has been more communication between the executive and legislature, and the responsible government officials have been conscientious. They communicate frequently with the pro-democracy camp, and this has led to an improvement in the relationship. We hope that there would be more reasonable discussions, and if the government is willing to cooperate, members would be happy to cooperate as well, and this can only be beneficial to Hong Kong. As for the amendments to the ROP, from my point of view, or the pro-Beijing camp's point of view, I would say that they have been effective. Since January, for controversial bills or ones that are not controversial, they were all able to be passed. But I think amendments to the ROP is not the only factor. And the criticisms towards the Chief Executive has not been so extreme. We used to see a lot of criticism towards Mr. CY Leung, and we can see that the Carrie Lam administration is very different from the CY Leung administration. When the Innovation and Technology Bureau was formed, there was filibustering from the pro-democracy camp. I heard that they are preparing to further amend the ROP, and at the Committee on Rules of Procedure, I have said that it would be ridiculous to bar members from returning for a year, and I find this idea unconstitutional. So I urge the pro-establishment members not to stir up further quarrels, because if you insist, we would certainly stage an objection. So in terms of the rules of procedure, I hope we can put to bed any proposal to amend it further.
Well, I must say this here. Well, even if it's, the idea to evict them for a year, it's actually, as Mr. Paul Jay, the chairman of the Committee on Rules of Procedure, said, it's not his idea. It's just that in their study they find that in some parliaments in other parts of the world there is a 1 year penalty sort of to bar members from coming back. But we have no plans to do that. But then at the same time we see much chaos at the council meetings sometimes. Why is it that some members could stay away from meetings? How come they could hurl bananas at people without suffering any consequences? Now, we're often told if the public don't go to work, their wage will be docked, or if they don't follow rules, they will be penalized in some ways. So for members who breach the rules of procedure, we just want that to be consequences. As I said before, for example, let's say if members are absently causing an abortion meeting, then members should be fined there's the red card of the yellow card, penalties and so on. These are issues that have been much discussed in the community, actually. Now, sorry, I should say for myself rather than for DAB, I believe that's actually a response to the demands of the public, so we support the motion. But of course, we'll go by the rules. The crop is now conducting a consultation. Is it possible that we could amend the rules of procedure before the end of the session or term? Well, we're not going to force it through, but we won't be shy away from it just because we're afraid of opposition from the Pan-Democrats.
Been quite efficient this year, but do you expect a more difficult year ahead, given LegCo will have to deal with some controversial topics like the national anthem law? And also, Mr. Kwok just said that LegCo seems to be enjoying a better relationship with the government, but you said there's still room for improvement. What exactly are you expecting? For example, what do you expect lawmakers and the government should do on their own parts? Thank you.
Maybe. Okay, sure. Thank you for your question. Yes, we do expect there will be controversial items coming up, like the national anthem law, and we've urged the government to be sensible about that law and be clear about what exactly you're legislating against, because the last thing we want to see is for people to fall into criminal offenses without knowing exactly what the scope of that offense is. So yes, we do expect there will be difficult times ahead, and Starry mentioned the possible change to the rules of procedure to ban legislators from coming back for meetings. I think that's going to be controversial, and that's going to be a difficult issue. But leaving that aside, I think whenever we can, we will try to work with the government and try to reason with them regarding whether it is policy or pieces of legislation. And because of that willingness, I think the government, as we can see, is more willing to have a constructive dialogue with my colleagues on a range of issues. I think that's good. I think that's. I think we should use that, hold that as an example of politics based on rationality, based on logic and the best interests of the Hong Kong people, rather than political infighting. I don't think the Hong Kong people want to see more of the CY Leung years of a government or relationship with LegCo. I think we're going in the right direction, but there are still lots of rooms for improvement. I think I've said just now that the chief executive should be more willing to listen when she comes to LegCo for those Q&A sessions, instead of asserting her views, but listen more and be more humble. I think that would be my advice to her. And I've also said that the ministers, the secretaries, are working very hard. There are a few of them who are very willing to reach out. And that I see as a principal difference between this administration and the last one, and I encourage that.
Well, I'm expecting a difficult year coming ahead, because based on the past experience, whenever we have an election coming up, we will have more and more controversial issue to be discussed in the council. But of course, this year we have experienced the co-location bill. I think this is the most controversial issue, well, at least up to this moment. well, anyway, I think we will have difficult time coming ahead, but I'm confident that we are able to manage that.
I'm from Now TV. Can I ask about next year? What are your views on your consideration of bills, especially with the impending national anthem bill? So do you expect things to be more challenging, and in which way? Well, for the national anthem legislation, it should be more challenging than the collocation bill. But of course, when the national anthem bill is tabled at LegCo and the Bills Committee is formed and there will be a public debate, we'll see how it turns out. Now, I personally think this is going to be challenging. That's because LegCo is a political body, and when we are near an election, then there will be controversial issues. But I don't think, I would say the national anthem bill should be more easy to deal with than the collocation bill, because the public generally could follow what it's about, and they appreciate why there is a need for the bill. I think we will have to wait till the bill is tabled before we could consider the details. From Apple Daily. Can I ask both of you whether you will remain as the chairman and deputy chairman next session? And one question for Dennis. Now, you said you have passed some views to the government on the music fountain. Would the government budge? And now a question for Sari. In the past year, the way you conducted meetings at the House Committee, it wasn't much controversial, except when there were amendments proposed to the rules of procedure, and then members criticize you for being unfair in the way you conduct meetings, or you cut short the speaking time and so on. Now, if there is something similar again, would you do it the same way? What do you think of the way you conducted meetings? Was it really controversial when you dealt with the collocation bill issue, for instance? Well, I think as long as it touches on certain subjects, doesn't matter how you conduct meetings, you'll be criticized for being unfair. The collocation bill or the amendments to the rules of procedure are good examples, of course. Now, of course, we'll go by the rules of procedure to allow members a chance to speak, to give their views. At the same time, we need to make sure that meetings are conducted in order. Well, the collocation bill is one good example. President Andrew Leung is going to face a no confidence motion. Main reasons because of the collocation bill. But in fact, many have dealt with funding proposals on the XRL, Mr. Chan Kim Paul, Mr. Chan Kam Lam. At the end, in fact, even Mrs. Regina Yip was once the chairman. At the end, they all had to cut short the filibustering. Every time people complained they were unfair. But of course, members may not accept that the line has to be drawn somewhere, or filibustering has to be cut short somehow. And that's why there would always be complaints. Can I please respond to the music fountain issue? Well, some members have views on the matter, but at the same time, you must also understand there is a strong demand in the district for the early construction of the music fountain. We've passed on that views to the government. The government's now made a compromise, and we could understand that. Now, LegCo does not respect a district council. District council has strong views about that. Of course, the district councillors are directly elected, and district councils may decide on certain projects. LegCo, of course, is entitled to give its views, but we cannot stall projects proposed through a democratic process. It's total disrespect of the district council. Martin just mentioned collocation bill or the national anthem bill. The way I see it, yes, of course, that they are challenging, and for controversial issues, that it will be a challenging process. But we can't, ruin the rules of procedure, abuse the rules of procedure because the process is challenging. That's why we have strong views about the way President Andrew Leung chaired meetings. Now, he restricted the duration for the second reading debate. At the end, only 6 or 7 members were left to speak, and he wouldn't allow them to speak. And we have strong views about that, and we are certainly against that. And he has to understand that if he tries to push things through by imposing time limits on members, there will be stronger repercussions. Now, whether we pass the co-location bill in 2 meetings or 3 meetings, I don't see any problem with that at all. And it has no impact on the government's rush to commission the line. So that's why we told Andrew Leung, if you do that, that means my colleagues, my brothers and sisters would just be really angry. You would just enrage them. It's not going to help things in the council. That's why we would have warned Andrew Leung again not to conduct meetings this way, because it will only make things worse. I don't know who he tries to please, but as the president, if he wants to push through the co-location bill in 2 weeks, it's really unnecessary. So there will be no trust remaining between him and members. On music fountain, yes, this is one of the controversial projects. At the Public Works Committee, actually, the project was voted down. We just believe that this council has its functions to perform. We need to consider these projects, just not because the district council has already endorsed a project that we must endorse it to. No, that's not the case. Especially if the Public Works Committee has already voted down the project and then the proposal is put forward to the Finance Committee for consideration, it's a show of disrespect to the Council as well. You should consider what the views are, and you should consider amending the proposal, and then you should go back to the District Council to consult them and come back to the this Council again. That is the better way to deal with it. So that's why I have passed on such views to the Chief Secretary of Administration. Looking ahead, even if there are challenging issues to tackle, I hope we will all deal with them in a rational manner and a reasonable manner. Thank you.
我自己係一定聽民主派嘅
I would certainly follow the stance and decision of the pro-democracy camp, and I would also respect the views of the pro-establishment camp. Mr. Dan Squawk, I do not quite agree with what you just said. I hope you would be able to accept different views. You criticize the President, Andrew Leung, of setting time limits and stifling the opportunities for members to speak. In many parliaments, there are similar limits on speaking time, and he made notice well ahead of time that there would be a few hours of debate time, so the rules were set very early on. You said only a few members were waiting to speak. Well, this is the time of the World Cup. Every football game has a time limit. Can you say that if certain players from a team has not had a shot on goal, the time of the game should be extended? I think the analogy of comparing the LegCo agenda to a football game is not very appropriate. And for a bill, there would be 15 minutes of speaking time for each member in the second reading, third reading, etc. And at the committee stage, members are allowed to speak repeatedly on the amendments, and the idea is for members to convince one another despite their differences, and through dialogue or debates, the divergent views might narrow. If you set an arbitrary limit of once per member, then there would be no rational debate at LegCo, because some members would only be able to say what they have in mind without the chance of a dialogue. And he said that, well, only a few members were waiting to speak, so they could be ignored. And during that occasion, even the pro-establishment members told me that they would like to speak, but they had no chance to speak anymore. So some of them told me in private that they were unhappy with the arrangement. If Andrew Leung wants to be a well-respected president and a capable president, he should respect his role and respect the rules of procedure. Over the course of debate, a lot of time was spent on adjournment motions and quorum calls. And I feel your attitude just now was problematic. You sounded like a gangster because you talked about your brothers. I think the public can see whether or not I spoke like a gangster. This is not something I can say for myself. If you have respect towards the ROP and respect the right for members to speak, in the second reading, each member should get 15 minutes. So why was a limit imposed? If he did not impose such limit, I'm sure my brothers and sisters would be more convinced of Andrew Leung's decision. So I trust that my brothers and sisters are all rational people. I think this is something we can discuss later. I think this is not the right time to debate the president's decision on co-location since there's a pending court ruling. Any further questions on the House Committee? I'm Annie from TVB. You said 21 items were referred to the House Committee. How many of them were already passed? Compared with the previous year, was there an increase or decrease? And has the relationship between executive and legislature improved? What were the 21 items you were referring to? Were you referring to the 22 or 21 items? You said 21 government motions were already introduced into legislature. It should be 22. How many of them were actually passed? Would the clerk be able to supplement the information? We can share the relevant information after the press briefing. There were 8. We completed 8 bills. I'm Ivy from Oriental Daily News. And in last year's annual briefing, like this year, a lot of government motions were only introduced in the second half of the year. Did you ever communicate with the administration on how more time could be afforded for deliberation in order to avoid so much controversy? We hope that the administration can provide a legislative program as soon as possible, and once we receive the program, it would be shared with members. We also reminded the administration to make the best use of council time, so the earlier they introduce the items or bills, the better. And there were a number of reasons why many government bills could not be submitted in the first half, and I have sympathy because this is the first year of the new administration, and it would take time to table the bills. And I hope that there would be an improvement in the second half of the year because some of the initial challenges should have disappeared. And hopefully more time can be allowed for deliberation on bills such as the National Anthems Bill. If a Bills Committee could be formed in the first half of the year, we would have more time to work with. There should be a legislative program containing the bills to be tabled, so the bills should be introduced as soon as possible so we have more time to scrutinize the bills. This would be a win-win situation for all. The Constitutional and Mainland Affairs Bureau said earlier that they hope to table the National Anthems Bill this year, but it's yet to be included on the agenda for tomorrow's council sitting. Did you consider what the reason is? I have been monitoring the progress of the national anthems bill, but I would not say that this Wednesday is the timeline. And even after the first reading, it would be referred to the House Committee, and we would consider whether a Bills Committee would be set up. So even by the time it's submitted to the House Committee, it will be after the summer recess. So there is no major difference anyway. So there's not much difference whether the bill is tabled for first reading before or after the summer recess, and hopefully the bill can be tabled soon after the summer recess. I feel that the bill itself has no urgency because the national anthem would not change overnight. I agree with the chairman that the bill should be tabled as soon as possible so that there's more time for discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Bye-bye.